My wife and her lover believed the warehouse held millions I had hidden for 10 years. Julian stared at the rusted door thinking one cut would change their lives. But behind that door wasn't treasure. It was a sentence. I spent 6 months turning that place into a trap to record every lie. Before we unlock that secret hit, like and subscribe. Buckle up because this story teaches traders a lesson they will never forget. My name is Charles Smith. I am 42 years old, and if you saw me walking down the rainy streets of Seattle, you probably would not look twice. I drive a sensible Volvo sedan, wear charcoal gray suits that are tailored but not flashy, and I have the kind of face that blends into a crowd, calm, composed, and perhaps a little too serious for a Friday night. I am the lead architect at a firm called Apex Meridian. In the world of commercial design, that name carries weight. We design the skylines that people put on postcards. I have spent my life calculating load-bearing walls and stress fractures, ensuring that massive structures do not collapse under their own weight. It is a bitter irony, then, that while I was busy ensuring the structural integrity of skyscrapers, the foundation of my own home was rotting away, eaten alive by termites I refused to see. For 15 years, I have been married to Sarah. She is 38, now 4 years my junior, and she is still as beautiful as the day I met her in a university library. Back then, her hunger for life seemed charming. She was ambitious, driven, always wanting to taste the best wine or visit the most exclusive resorts. I told myself that I loved her zest for life. I told myself that my role as a provider was to feed that hunger. And I did. I gave her a beautiful home in the suburbs, a closet full of designer labels, and the security that comes with a husband who pulls in a significant salary. But over the last few years, the air in our house had changed. It was no longer the warm comfort of a shared life. It had become heavy, filled with a silence that screamed. To our friends and neighbors, we were the golden couple. We hosted the summer barbecues. We sent out the perfect Christmas cards. But inside those walls, I could feel her eyes on me, always assessing, always calculating. It was as if she was looking at a bank balance that was not growing fast enough for her liking. She wanted a lifestyle of private jets and penthouses, the kind she saw on social media. And despite my success, I was merely an upper-middle-class architect, not an oil tycoon. I have always kept my work separate from my personal life. Apex Meridian is a pressure cooker. Dealing with billionaire developers and city zoning boards requires a level of mental fortitude that leaves you drained by 5 in the afternoon. My rule was simple when I walk through the front door of our home. Charles the architect stays outside. I wanted our home to be a sanctuary devoid of blueprints and contract disputes. However, every man needs a place to be himself, a place to think, and for me, that place was Warehouse 404. Located in an old industrial park on the edge of town, Warehouse 404 was a rusted metal box to the naked eye. It sat among abandoned textile factories and auto repair shops, the kind of place where weeds grow through the cracks in the asphalt. Sarah hated it. Every month when the bank statement arrived, she would highlight the rental fee, $800 a month, and wave it in my face. She called it a waste. She called it my midlife crisis locker. She could not understand why I needed 1,200 square feet of dusty concrete when we had a perfectly good garage. What Sarah did not know, and what I never fully explained, was that the warehouse was my true sanctuary. It was where I kept the things that actually mattered to me. My father was a carpenter, a man who could look at a piece of rough timber and see a violin. When he passed away 10 years ago, I could not bear to sell his tools. His workbench, his chisels, his hand planes, they were all there, arranged with the same care he had used for 50 years. But there was something else in that warehouse, something far more valuable than sentimental tools. I am not just an architect who draws what clients want. I am an inventor of spaces. For the past decade, I have been working on a series of modular, eco-sustainable housing designs. These were not just sketches. I had built full-scale prototypes in that warehouse. I had developed a proprietary locking mechanism for modular construction that could revolutionize affordable housing. I had patents pending intellectual property that, if licensed correctly to the right developers, was worth millions of dollars. I called it the Hive Project. It was my retirement plan. It was our future, but I kept it quiet. I wanted it to be a surprise, a finished masterpiece that I could present to the world on my own terms. Sarah, however, had a different theory. One evening, about 6 months ago, she stood in our kitchen holding a glass of Chardonnay that cost more than my first car. She narrowed her eyes at me. "You have money in there, do you not, Charles?" she asked, her voice dripping with a playfulness that did not reach her eyes. "It is full of sawdust and old paper, Sarah," I replied, cutting vegetables for our dinner. "I told you, it is just storage." "Do not lie to me," she smirked, taking a sip. "Men do not pay nearly $1,000 a month to store a dead man's hammers. You are hiding a stash. A rainy day fund. Come on, how much is it? 50,000, 100. I chuckled, shaking my head. "If I had $100,000 in cash, we would have gone to the Maldives last summer like you wanted." "Maybe you just do not want to spend it on me," she muttered, turning away. It was a joke or so, I thought. But looking back, I realize that was the moment the seed was planted. She was projecting. She could not fathom that I would value creative work and sentimental heirlooms over cold hard cash. To Sarah, value was only transactional. If it could not be spent, it was worthless. And if I was hiding something in her mind, it had to be currency. Then came the night of the charity gala for the Seattle Arts Council. It was a black tie affair, the kind of event where the champagne is free, but the conversation costs you your soul. I was wearing my tuxedo, feeling slightly suffocated, while Sarah looked radiant in a red silk gown that hugged her curves in all the right places. She thrived in these environments. She worked the room laughing at jokes that were not funny and complimenting women she despised. I was standing near the bar nursing a sparkling water when he walked in. Julian Thorne. He was the kind of man who looked like he had been manufactured in a laboratory designed to extract money from wealthy widows. He was perhaps 35 years old, 7 years younger than me, with slicked back dark hair and a suit that was a little too tight, a little too shiny. He walked with a swagger that screamed confidence, but to a trained eye, it looked like overcompensation. He was introduced to our circle by a mutual acquaintance who described him as a visionary venture capitalist, looking for opportunities in the Pacific Northwest. I watched him operate. He did not look at the men in the circle. He looked at the wives. He scanned them like a wolf, scanning a herd, looking for the one that was slightly separated, slightly bored, slightly hungry. When he was introduced to us, he barely shook my hand. His grip was limp, dismissive. But when he turned to Sarah, his entire demeanor shifted. He took her hand and held it a second too long, his eyes locking onto hers, with an intensity that was inappropriate for a first meeting. "Sarah," he said, rolling the R slightly, "you are far too vibrant to be standing in this dull corner. That dress deserves a spotlight, not a shadow." It was a cheesy line. It was the kind of line that should have made a woman like Sarah roll her eyes. Instead, she blushed. I saw the color rise in her cheeks, a flush I had not seen directed at me in years. She giggled, actually giggled, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Oh, stop it," she said, but her body language leaned toward him. "Charles is the architect. I am just the decoration." "Beauty is the highest form of architecture," Julian said, ignoring me completely. "It gives life meaning. Without you, Charles here is just stacking bricks." He winked at me, a condescending, arrogant wink. At that moment, my gut tightened. It was a primal reaction. I knew this man was a fraud. Real money whispers. It does not strut. Real power is quiet. Julian Thorne was loud. He smelled of desperation, masked by expensive cologne. But Sarah smelled the illusion of excitement. She saw a young, handsome man who spoke the language of grandeur that she felt she was denied. I stepped in, placing a hand on the small of Sarah's back, asserting a territorial claim I felt foolish for needing to make. "We should get back to our table, Sarah. The keynote speech is starting in 5 minutes. "Relax, Charles," she snapped, her voice sharp. Then she softened as she looked back at Julian. "It was lovely meeting you, Julian." "The pleasure was mine," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am sure we will bump into each other again. Seattle is a small town for people like us. People like us." He had already created a club, and I was not invited. The weeks that followed were a slow descent into paranoia. I tried to dismiss it. I told myself I was being insecure. Sarah loved me. We had built a life together. But the signs were their subtle cracks in the foundation. She started guarding her phone. She changed her passcode. When I walked into a room, she would quickly flip the screen down. She became critical of everything I did. The way I chewed. The way I dressed, the fact that I preferred to stay in on Friday nights. "You are so boring, Charles," she said one night over dinner. "You act like an old man. Don't you ever want to take a risk?" "I take risks every day with million-dollar budgets," I replied calmly. "I like my life stable." "Stable is another word for dead," she retorted. Then came the Tuesday of the rainstorm. Sarah had a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she went to a yoga studio in Bellevue. It was a sacred time for her, or so she said. Hot yoga for inner peace, the class was called. She would leave the house at 6 in the evening and return by 8:30, usually complaining about how sore she was, but how cleansed she felt. That Tuesday, the rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of Seattle downpour that turns the world gray. I had left the office early, around 5:30, intending to surprise her with a dinner reservation at her favorite Italian place after her class. I thought maybe we could salvage things. Maybe if I tried harder, if I was less boring, she would look at me the way she looked at Julian Thorne that night. I drove toward the yoga studio, planning to wait in the parking lot until she finished. As I turned the corner onto 4th Street, 2 blocks away from the studio, I saw her car. It was her white SUV parked not at the yoga studio, but in front of a trendy coffee shop called The Alchemist. I slowed down, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maybe she stopped for a coffee before class, but it was already 6:15. Class had started 15 minutes ago. I pulled my car into a spot across the street, killing the headlights. The rain blurred the windshield, so I had to squint to see through the large glass window of the cafe. There she was. She was not wearing yoga clothes. She was wearing a trench coat and heels. And she was not alone. Sitting across from her at a small, intimate table was Julian Thorne. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, speaking with animated gestures. Sarah was entranced. She was laughing, her hand resting on his forearm. It was a gesture of familiarity, of comfort. It was not the body language of a casual acquaintance. It was the body language of a woman who was sharing a secret. I watched them for 20 minutes. I watched him reach out and tuck a stray hair behind her ear, the same way she had done at the gala. I watched her look at him with a mixture of adoration and hunger. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Just got to yoga instructor is a killer tonight. Phone off. Love you." I looked down at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dark interior of my car. Then I looked back at the window. Julian was whispering something to her, and she was nodding, her eyes wide. I did not storm in. I did not make a scene. I am Charles Smith, the architect. I understand structures. I understand that when you find a crack in a load-bearing wall, you do not hit it with a sledgehammer. You inspect it. You determine the depth of the rot. You analyze the failure points. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving them in the warm glow of the cafe window. The text message remained unanswered on my phone. She lied. She was not just having coffee. She was building a separate life brick by lying brick. And worse, she was doing it with a man who looked at her not as a partner, but as a gateway to something else. As I drove home to an empty house, The rain drumming a funeral march on the roof of my car, I thought about the warehouse. I thought about Sarah's obsession with what was inside. And for the first time, a cold, dark thought entered my mind. If she was lying about the yoga, what else was she lying about? And if Julian Thorne was the venture capitalist he claimed to be, why was he spending his Tuesday night wooing a married woman in a coffee shop instead of closing deals? The foundation had not just cracked. It had shattered. And I was the only one who knew that the roof was about to come down. The silence in our house had changed texture. It was no longer the comfortable silence of two people reading in the same room, or the tired silence after a long day of work. It had become a thick, suffocating fog charged with static electricity. After that night outside the coffee shop, I did not confront Sarah immediately. A structural engineer does not scream at a building when he sees a crack. He monitors it. He measures the rate of expansion. He determines if the foundation can be salvaged or if the whole thing needs to be condemned. I decided to watch. The first casualty was the digital transparency we had shared for a decade and a half. For years, our phones had been open books, often left charging on the kitchen counter screen up accessible. If her mother called while she was in the shower, I would answer. If I needed to look up a recipe and my battery was dead, I would grab her device without a second thought. That ended the morning after I saw her with Julian. I walked into the kitchen to find her phone lying face down on the marble island. When I reached for it to check the time, she practically lunged across the room. "Do not touch that," she snapped, her voice shrill. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the device. I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral. I asked her why she was so jumpy. She stammered, flushing a deep crimson. She said she was planning a surprise for my birthday and did not want me to see the emails. My birthday was 8 months away. I did not point this out. Later that evening, while she was in the shower, I tried to unlock her phone just to test my theory. The passcode, which had been the last 4 digits of our wedding date for 10 years, was gone. It had been replaced by a 6-digit code. The fortress walls had gone up. The late-night activity began 2 days later. Sarah had always been an early sleeper, claiming she needed her beauty rest. Now, I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to find her side of the bed empty. I would find her downstairs in the living room, sitting in the dark, the blue light of her screen illuminating her face like a ghostly mask. Her thumbs moved across the glass with a frantic intensity. Whenever I walked down, she would hastily swipe the screen off and claim she could not sleep because of stress or a headache. But I knew the difference between an insomniac and a woman in love. An insomniac looks tired. Sarah looked exhilarated, high on the dopamine of a secret life. Then came the criticism. It started as a low hum and quickly grew into a roar. Nothing I provided was good enough anymore. Our house, a 3,000-square-foot craftsman that we had spent years renovating, suddenly became a shack in her eyes. She began to leave real estate brochures for multi-million-dollar penthouses on the dining table, circling properties that cost 5 times my annual salary. She would look around our living room and sigh a sound of pure exhaustion. She asked why we did not have a vacation home in Aspen. She asked why I drove a Volvo when successful men drove Porsches or Aston Martins. She never said Julian's name explicitly in these comparisons, but his phantom presence was everywhere. She was parroting his worldview. I could hear his voice in her mouth. She would say things like, "You have to spend money. To make money, Charles, or risk is the currency of the elite." These were not Sarah's thoughts. They were slogans from a con man's sales pitch, regurgitated by a woman who desperately wanted to believe she was part of the elite. The most galling part was Julian's physical intrusion into our lives. He did not just stay in the shadows. He began to bleed into my reality. It started with accidental run-ins. We would be at our favorite bistro for Friday dinner, and suddenly Julian would be at the bar. He would come over to our table holding a martini, feigning surprise. Charles, Sarah. "What a delightful coincidence," he would say, flashing that shark-like smile. He would shake my hand, and I could feel the challenge in his grip. It was not a handshake, it was a measurement. He was sizing me up, laughing internally at the joke only he and Sarah understood. He would stand there, chatting about the market or the weather, but his eyes never left Sarah's neckline. And Sarah. She would act flustered, touching her hair, laughing too loudly at his mediocre jokes. It was a humiliating theater performance, and I was forced to play the role of the oblivious husband. One afternoon, I came home early to find a shopping bag from a high-end men's boutique stuffed deep into the bottom of the recycling bin in the garage. It was a receipt for a pair of diamond-encrusted cufflinks. The price was $2,500. My heart skipped a beat. For a split second, I thought maybe she really was planning a surprise for me. But then I checked the date on the receipt. It was purchased 3 days ago. My birthday was nowhere near. I went upstairs and checked my dresser, my closet, everywhere. There were no cufflinks. 2 days later, at another one of those suffocating social mixers, I saw them. They were glittering on the cuffs of Julian Thorne. He caught me looking at them. Instead of hiding them, he shot his cuffs, displaying them proudly, and raised his glass to me. It was a subtle, brutal power move. My wife had used my money, or perhaps the credit card debt she was secretly racking up to adorn her lover. However, the definitive moment, the moment that shifted my mindset from heartbreak to cold survival, happened on a rainy Saturday night. Sarah had come home from a dinner with her girlfriends, or so she claimed, slightly intoxicated. She was loose, her movements uncoordinated, her guard lowered by wine. I was in the study reviewing some schematics for a new hospital wing when she stumbled in. She leaned against the doorframe, swirling the last dregs of red wine in her glass. She looked at me with glazed eyes, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman I used to love. But then her expression hardened into something greedy. "Charles," she slurred. "Yes, Sarah," I replied, not looking up from my blueprints. "If we ever split up, hypothetically speaking, of course," she said, taking a sip of wine. "What happens to the warehouse?" I stopped writing. The pen hovered over the paper. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I turned my swivel chair slowly to face her. "Why would you ask that?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but failing miserably. "Just curious. I mean, you pour so much money into that dump. $800 a month. If we divorced, that is a marital asset, right? Whatever is in there, half of it belongs to me." I stared at her. This was not just a drunk question. This was a reconnaissance mission. Julian had put her up to this. They were not just having an affair. They were planning an exit strategy, and that strategy involved liquidation. She did not care about my work, my father's tools, or my prototypes. She believed the lie I had inadvertently let fester, that the warehouse was full of cash. "There is nothing in there but dust and old wood." "Sarah," I lied, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It has no monetary value." She smirked, a nasty, knowing little twist of her lips. "You are a terrible liar, Charles. You always have been." She turned and stumbled out of the room, leaving me in the cold silence of the study. That was the moment the switch flipped. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a crystalline clarity. They were coming for me. They were coming for my life's work. They were wolves, circling a wounded animal, waiting for it to bleed out. But they had made a critical error. They assumed the animal was helpless. The next day, while Sarah was at her hair appointment, I went to work. Not at the office, but on my own defense. I drove to a specialty electronics store on the other side of the city, paying in cash. I bought a high-definition dash camera with an interior recording function and a GPS tracker. I also purchased 2 high-fidelity long-range listening devices, the kind used by private investigators. I installed the camera in her SUV myself. I hardwired it into the fuse box so it would look like part of the vehicle's original safety system, tucking the wires behind the upholstery with surgical precision. It was set to record not just the road, but the cabin interior, and to upload the footage to a secure cloud server whenever the car was in range of a Wi-Fi signal. Inside the house, I placed the listening devices. One went under the heavy oak coffee table in the living room, adhered with industrial tape. The other went behind the headboard of our bed. It made me sick to my stomach to do it. The idea of spying on my own wife in our marital bed was repulsive. But I needed to know the extent of the rot. I needed to know if I was sleeping next to a cheater or a criminal. That same night, I started the Black Diary. It was a simple, leather-bound notebook with thick, cream-colored pages. I sat in my study, locked the door, and wrote the first entry. I recorded the date. I recorded the incident with the cufflinks. I recorded the conversation about the warehouse. I treated it like a project log at work. Every anomaly, every lie, every unexplained credit card charge went into the book. It was no longer a marriage. It was a case file. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the house shifted from awkwardness to open hostility. Sarah stopped trying to hide her disdain. She began to isolate me. We used to have a close circle of friends, other couples we would see for barbecues or game nights. Suddenly, the invitations stopped coming. When I ran into Mike, a friend I had known since college, at the grocery store, he looked at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. He made an excuse and walked away quickly. I realized then that Sarah was poisoning the well. She was rewriting our history to our friends, painting me as the villain. I was the cold, distant husband. I was the one who refused to give her a child. I was the one who was arguably controlling her finances. She was projecting all of her sins onto me, creating a narrative where her affair with Julian would look like a rescue mission rather than a betrayal. I was alone. I was living in a house with an enemy combatant. Every dinner was a minefield. Every conversation was a trap. But as I watched her typing furiously on her phone across the table, ignoring my existence, I felt a strange sense of calm. She thought she was isolating me. She thought she was cutting off my support system. She did not realize that she was only giving me the solitude I needed to prepare. She wanted the warehouse. She wanted the treasure she believed was hidden behind those rusted doors. I looked at her, sipping her wine, completely unaware that the man she thought was a boring architect was currently designing the most complex structure of his life. I would give her the warehouse. I would give her exactly what she asked for. And God help her when she found it. Information is power, but only if you have the structural integrity to handle the weight of the truth. I had spent my career ensuring that steel beams could support tons of concrete. Yet nothing prepared me for the crushing weight of the manila folder that sat on the table in front of me. I had hired a private investigator named Reynolds 3 days after I installed the listening devices. Reynolds was not like the detectives you see in movies. He did not wear a trench coat or smoke cigarettes in the rain. He was a forensic accountant by trade who transitioned into private investigations. He looked like a high school math teacher, complete with wire-rimmed glasses and a penchant for sweater vests. But he was ruthless when it came to digging up digital dirt. We met at a 24-hour diner near the port, a place where the coffee tasted like battery acid and nobody asked questions. Reynolds slid the folder across the laminated tabletop. It was thick. "You are not going to like this, Charles," he said, his voice flat and professional. "But you need to read every page." I opened the file. The first page was a photocopy of a driver's license. The face was familiar. It was the same slicked back hair, the same arrogant jawline. But the name was not Julian Thorne. "His real name is Julius Thorne Reynolds," explained, as I stared at the photo. "But he has gone by Julian St. James, Julian Vanderbilt, and Julian Roth over the last 10 years. I flipped the page. It was a financial summary. The numbers were staggering, but not in the way Sarah imagined. There were no venture capital funds. There were no offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. There was only debt. Massive, crushing debt. "This guy is drowning." Charles Reynolds continued, pointing to a column of red numbers. "He owes over $80,000 to 2 different casinos in Nevada. He has maxed out 6 credit cards under 3 different aliases. He is currently being sued by a landlord in Portland for $12,000 in unpaid rent. He is not a venture capitalist. He is unemployed. His last legitimate job was selling timeshares in Florida 5 years ago, and he was fired for theft." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. My wife was not having an affair with a billionaire. She was sleeping with a beggar in a stolen suit. Reynolds flipped to the next section. These were police reports. "He has a pattern," Reynolds said. "He targets women in their late 30s or early 40s. Women who feel undervalued, women who are bored. He finds the ones who are married to steady, hard-working men like you. He sells them a fantasy. He tells them he is an investor, a producer, an heir. He convinces them to leave their husbands, but not before they liquidate assets. He has done this 3 times in California. He gets them to empty joint accounts, sell jewelry, or take out loans. Then he vanishes. He has never been convicted because the victims are usually too embarrassed to press charges, or he frames it as a bad business investment. It is a civil matter, not criminal. He is slippery. I looked at the photos of the previous victims. They looked normal. They looked like Sarah. He is hunting," Charles Reynolds said, leaning in. "And he thinks you are the whale. He thinks you have millions tucked away because of your job title and the house you live in. He is squeezing your wife to get to your wallet. I paid Reynolds in cash $500 for the initial retainer and another $1,000 for the expedited report. I drove home with the file on the passenger seat. It felt radioactive. When I got home, the house was empty. Sarah was out, presumably with him. I went straight to the living room and retrieved the tiny memory card from the listening device under the coffee table. I went into my study, locked the door, and inserted the card into my laptop. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear. I heard the front door open. I heard Sarah's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Then I heard his voice. Julian. He was in my house. The audacity took my breath away. He was walking around my living room, drinking my scotch. "Do not worry about him, babe," Julian's voice sneered through the headphones. "He is too busy playing with his little blueprints. He does not suspect a thing." I heard the clinking of ice in a glass. Then Sarah spoke. Her voice sounded fragile, scared. "I do not know Julian. He has been acting weird. He asked me about the warehouse again." "What if he knows?" "Let him know," Julian laughed. "It does not matter. Listen to me, Sarah. We have gone over this. Why do you think he keeps that warehouse locked up? Why do you think he pays rent on a dump like that for 10 years? "I do not know," Sarah whimpered. "He says it is tools." "Tools," Julian scoffed. "Come on, Sarah. You are smarter than that. Architects get kickbacks. They get cash bonuses under the table from contractors. He has been skimming off the top for a decade. That warehouse is not a workshop. It is a vault. He is hiding money from you. He is preparing to leave you, Sarah. He is going to file for divorce claim. He is broke, and then sail off into the sunset with his millions while you get nothing." I sat frozen in my chair. It was brilliant. It was evil, but it was brilliant. Julian was projecting his own predatory nature onto me. He was turning me into the villain so Sarah would feel justified in robbing me. He was weaponizing her insecurity. "So what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We take what is yours," Julian said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "We get into that warehouse. We take the cash, the gold, whatever is in there. And then we go. I have a villa lined up in the south of France. Just you and me. No more gloomy Seattle rain. No more boring husband. Just us and the life you deserve." I heard the sound of kissing, wet, sloppy sounds that made my stomach turn. "I need that key," Sarah Julian whispered. "You have to find the key to the warehouse." I pulled the headphones off and threw them onto the desk. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it burned. She believed him. She actually believed that I, the man who had paid off her student loans, the man who had nursed her through the flu, the man who had built her a garden with his own hands, was plotting against her. She chose to believe the lies of a stranger because they fed her greed. I knew then that the marriage was not just dead. It was a crime scene. Sarah was no longer my wife. She was an accomplice to a con man. I could have walked out right then. I could have thrown the file in her face, kicked her out, and called a lawyer. But that would have been too easy. That would have left Julian free to move on to the next victim, and Sarah. She would just play the victim card, claiming I was abusive or controlling. Number 1. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed to let them hang themselves with the rope of their own avarice. Later that night, I staged the bait. I knew Sarah waited until I was asleep to search the house. I had seen the signs papers shuffled on my desk drawers, slightly ajar. So I made it easy for her. I took a spare key, an old key to a storage unit I no longer owned, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk, hidden under a stack of old tax returns. It was a classic hiding spot, difficult enough to feel like a discovery, but easy enough for a desperate amateur to find. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, feigning exhaustion. I lay there in the dark, breathing rhythmically, waiting. At 2 a.m, the bedroom door creaked open. I watched through half-closed eyelids as Sarah crept into the room. She was wearing her silk robe, moving like a ghost. She checked to make sure I was asleep, waving a hand in front of my face. I did not flinch. She turned and slipped into my home office across the hall. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I heard the soft slide of a drawer opening, the rustle of paper, a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. She had found it. She came back into the bedroom 5 minutes later. She slid into bed next to me, her body radiating a nervous heat. She thought she had won. She thought she held the key to her freedom. I lay there, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, tears silently streaming down my face. I mourned the woman I thought she was. I mourned the years we had wasted. But as the tears dried, a new resolve hardened like concrete setting in a mold. If they wanted a heist, I would give them a heist. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I waited for Sarah to leave for her Pilates class, which I knew was a strategy meeting with Julian. As soon as her car turned the corner, I drove to the hardware store. I bought 6 heavy-duty padlocks, a spool of tripwire motion-activated floodlights, and a high-decibel industrial alarm system. I also bought a can of black spray paint and a large sheet of plywood. I drove to Warehouse 404. It was a gloomy day, the sky the color of a bruised plum. I unlocked the main door, the real door, and stepped inside. The air smelled of sawdust and cedar, the smell of my father. My prototypes stood in the center of the room, beautiful intricate structures of wood and steel. I spent the next 6 hours transforming my sanctuary into a stage. I did not move my intellectual property. I simply covered the prototypes with heavy tarps, making them look like indistinct, bulky shapes. To the untrained eye, they could be anything: crates of cash, stacks of gold bars, artwork. I went to the back of the warehouse, where an old, non-functional floor safe was embedded in the concrete. I had never used it. It came with the place. I cleaned the rust off the dial. I set the combination to Sarah's birthday. It was pathetic how predictable people were, and I knew Julian would try that date first. Inside the safe, I placed a single envelope. Inside that envelope, I placed a printout of the bank transfer confirmation I had executed that morning, moving every cent of my liquid assets into an irrevocable trust for a charity that builds homes for the homeless. I also placed the signed divorce papers inside. But I was not done. I set up the cameras. I placed one high in the rafters pointing down at the safe. I placed another by the door. I wired the motion sensors to a silent trigger that would alert my phone, not the police. Not yet. I wanted to see them panic first. I checked the sight lines. I checked the lighting. I wanted the lighting to be dramatic, shadowy, forcing them to use flashlights, forcing them to feel the intensity of the crime. As I stood there looking at the trap I had built, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was no longer a husband. I was an architect designing a collapse. I was engineering a controlled demolition of my own life. I looked at the fake key in my pocket, the duplicate of the one Sarah had stolen. They thought they were breaking in to steal my fortune. They did not realize they were breaking into a prison of their own making. I left the warehouse at 4 p.m. I locked the door knowing that the next time it opened, it would be by the force of a bolt cutter. I drove home, cooked a dinner, and waited for my wife to return. When she walked in, cheeks flushed with the excitement of her secret plan, I smiled at her. "How was Pilates?" I asked. "Great," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Really intense." "I bet it was," I said. "I bet it was." I went to sleep that night, knowing it would be the last time I slept under the same roof as her. The trap was set. The players were in position. All that was left was for them to make their move. And I knew with the certainty of a mathematical equation that greed would push them through that door. To watch your wife being brainwashed is a specific kind of torture. It is not swift like a physical blow. It is a slow, agonizing erosion, like watching a coastline crumble into the sea during a long storm. Through the high-fidelity listening devices I had planted, I became a silent spectator to the systematic dismantling of Sarah's personality. Julian Thorne was not just a con man. He was a psychological butcher. He did not just want her to steal from me. He wanted her to hate me because hate is a much stronger motivator than greed. I would sit in my office at Apex Meridian headphones, unostensibly reviewing CAD drawings, but in reality, I was listening to the audio feed from my living room. Julian's voice had a cadence to it, a rhythmic, hypnotic quality. He worked on Sarah's insecurities like a sculptor working clay. "He does not see you," Sarah Julian would whisper. I could hear the clink of silverware, the pouring of wine. "He looks at you and sees a housekeeper. He sees an obligation. I look at you and I see a queen who has been denied her crown. Why does he keep you on such a short leash? Why does he make you beg for every penny?" It was a lie, of course. Sarah had credit cards with limits that could buy a small sedan. But truth did not matter. What mattered was the feeling of deprivation he was cultivating in her. He isolated her. When her mother called, I heard him whisper that her family was just trying to control her, just like I was. When her friends texted, he told her they were jealous of her potential. He was cutting the ropes that tethered her to reality, leaving her drifting in a sea where he was the only lighthouse. Then came the financial aggression. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen making a simple pasta dish when Sarah walked in. She did not ask how my day was. She slammed a bank statement onto the counter. "I want my name on the primary investment accounts, Charles," she stated, her voice tight and rehearsed. I looked up, feigning surprise. I adjusted the heat on the stove and wiped my hands on a towel. "Your name is on the joint checking and the savings," Sarah, I said, keeping my voice mild. "The investment accounts are managed by the firm. It is complicated." "It is not complicated," she shouted, a sudden burst of rage that made me flinch. "It is control. You are controlling me," Julian says. She stopped herself, realizing she had said his name. I looked at her, blinking rapidly, pretending to be the confused, henpecked husband. "Who says my financial advisor?" she corrected quickly, though her face was pale. "I have been reading Charles. I know my rights. I want access. If you loved me, you would trust me." I looked at her hands. They were trembling. She was terrified. "Julian, Must have been pressuring her hard, telling her that if she did not get access, I was going to cut her off. I decided to play the role they had cast for me, the weak, desperate man trying to buy his wife's affection. "Okay, Sarah," I said, bowing my head. "Okay, I do not want to fight. I will transfer some funds to the joint account. I want you to feel secure." The next morning, I transferred $5,000 into our shared account. It was a drop in the bucket, but it was a calculated sacrifice. It was bait. I wanted them to think I was folding. I wanted them to think I was so afraid of losing her that I would throw money at the problem. It worked. For a few days, the tension eased. But Sarah's contempt for me grew. She began to see my capitulation as weakness. The predator in her, awakened by Julian, smelled blood. Her cruelty became public. We were at a neighborhood block party a week later. I tried to avoid it, but appearances had to be maintained. We were standing with the Millers, a nice couple who lived 2 doors down. Dave Miller was talking about a new boat he had bought. Charles would never buy a boat. Sarah interrupted her laugh, brittle and loud. She was holding a plastic cup of wine, her third. "Charles counts every penny. He thinks if he spends $1, the world will end. He is so small." She made a gesture with her fingers, indicating something tiny. The Millers looked uncomfortable. Dave cleared his throat and looked at his shoes. "Sarah," I said softly. "Oh, stop it," she snapped, rolling her eyes. "Do not give me that wounded puppy look. It is true. You sit on that pile of money in your warehouse like a dragon, while I have to beg for scraps." The reference to the warehouse made my blood run cold, but I kept my face impassive. She was leaking information. She was so consumed by the narrative Julian had fed her that she was losing her filter. I excused myself and walked away, leaving her to badmouth me to the neighbors. Let her. The more she villainized me, the more credible her eventual downfall would be. The direct confrontation with Julian happened 3 days later. I had expected it, but the reality of it was more chilling than I had anticipated. I was leaving the Apex Meridian building. It was late past 8 in the evening. The city was dark, the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. I walked toward the parking garage, my footsteps echoing in the concrete canyon. As I reached my car, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. It was him, Julian Thorne. He was wearing a camel hair coat that looked expensive, but was likely a knockoff. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing orange in the gloom. "Charles," he said smoothly. Working late again, I stopped my hand instinctively, going to the door handle of my Volvo. I did not unlock it. I turned to face him. "Julian," I said, "what are you doing here?" He took a drag of the cigarette and flicked the ash onto the ground near my shoe. "Just passing by. Thought I would say hello, check on the competition." "I am not your competition, Julian," I said. "I am an architect." "You are well. I am not quite sure what you are." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I am the guy who makes things happen, Charles. I am the guy who sees value where others see a burden, like Sarah." My jaw tightened. "Leave my wife out of this. Can I?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. He smelled of tobacco and peppermint. "She is unhappy, Charles. She is wilting. A woman like that needs sunlight. She needs luxury. She needs a man who understands that money is meant to be spent, not hoarded in some dusty storage unit." I felt the phone in my breast pocket. I had tapped the record button the moment I saw him. "I provide for my wife," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Do you?" he sneered. "She does not think so. She thinks you are holding out on her. She told me about the warehouse, Charles. She told me about the assets." He leaned in his face inches from mine. His voice dropped to a menacing growl. "You should know something, Charles. Sarah deserves better, and I am going to make sure she gets it. You can either share the wealth voluntarily, or you can lose everything. Be a smart boy. Do not force my hand." He patted my cheek, a degrading, patronizing tap, and then turned and walked away into the darkness. I stood there for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. He had slipped. He had made it about the money, share the wealth, the warehouse. He had confirmed in his own voice that his interest in Sarah was inextricably linked to my assets. I stopped the recording and uploaded it immediately to the secure cloud. That was Exhibit A for the extortion charges. But I knew this was not enough. I needed to accelerate the timeline. They were getting impatient. If I waited too long, Julian might get violent or Sarah might do something irreversible. I needed to give them the key to their own destruction. The next morning, I met with my estate attorney. He was an old friend of my father's, a man who built his career on protecting legacies. I told him everything. I played him the recording. He sat in silence, his face grim. We executed the documents that afternoon. I transferred the legal title of my stock portfolio, my bonds, and the deed to the house into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary was a non-profit organization dedicated to veteran housing. The terms were strict. I retained a life estate, meaning I could use the assets while I was alive, but I could not be compelled to liquidate them for a divorce settlement, and, more importantly, if I died, or if the assets were targeted by criminal theft, the ownership immediately fully vested in the charity. Effectively, I had made myself poor on paper. There was nothing for Sarah to take, but they did not know that. They needed to believe the pot of gold was real. I went to an antique shop in the Pioneer Square district and bought an old leather-bound ledger. It smelled of mildew and history. I spent the evening in a coffee shop across town, far from home, filling the pages. I used 3 different pens to make the entries look like they had been written over several years. I created a fiction that would make a pirate drool. October 14, 2020. Deposit 40 Krugerrands. Section B. March 3, 2021. Cash deposit $150,000. Bundle 4, July 22, 2023. Liquidation of crypto assets. Conversion to bearer bonds. Value $2.2 million. Safe. I wrote about gold bars. I wrote about rare coins. I detailed a fortune totaling nearly $4 million, all supposedly sitting in warehouse 404. I drew a crude map on the last page, marking the location of the floor safe with a red X. Now I had to plant it. I knew Sarah's habits. When she was nervous, she cleaned. She reorganized things. I decided to hide the notebook in a place that felt secret, but was easily discoverable for someone looking for dirt. There was a loose floorboard in the back of the master bedroom closet under the shoe rack. I had fixed it years ago, but I pried it up slightly. I wrapped the notebook in a plastic freezer bag to protect it, then shoved it under the board. I left the corner of the bag sticking out just a fraction of an inch, invisible if you were just walking by, but obvious if you were on your hands and knees looking for shoes or secrets. I waited. 2 days passed. The tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah was manic, snapping at me for breathing too loud, then ignoring me for hours. Then it happened. I was at work monitoring the hidden camera feed on my second monitor. It was 11 in the morning. Sarah was in the bedroom. She was throwing shoes out of the closet looking for something. She was angry, muttering to herself. Then she stopped. She saw the plastic sticking out from the floorboard. I watched her freeze. She looked toward the bedroom door, checking to make sure she was alone. She knelt down and pried at the loose board. She pulled out the bag. She ripped it open and took out the notebook. I zoomed in on the camera feed. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She flipped through the pages. I saw her eyes go wide. She gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. She was reading the entry about the $2.2 million. She did not look horrified that her husband was hiding secrets. She looked ecstatic. She looked like she had just won the lottery. She scrambled for her phone. She placed the notebook on the floor and began taking pictures of the pages. Click, click, click. I switched tabs on my computer to monitor the network traffic. I saw the large data packets being sent from her phone. She was texting the images. I knew exactly who was receiving them. 10 seconds later, her phone buzzed. She picked it up and read the reply. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator who has just seen the prey limp. She quickly shoved the notebook back into the bag and stuffed it back under the floorboard, arranging the shoes to cover the spot. She stood up, smoothed her hair, and walked out of the room, with a bounce in her step that had not been there for months. I sat back in my office chair and exhaled a long breath. The bait was taken. The hook was set. Julian now had the proof he needed to convince Sarah to commit a felony. He would see those numbers and lose all rationality. He would not ask why a smart architect would keep millions in a damp warehouse. Greed blinds you to logic. They were going to break in, and they were going to do it soon. I picked up my phone and called the detective. I had been coordinating with a man named Detective Miller, who I had met through Reynolds. "Detective," I said quietly, "get your team ready. I think we are going to have visitors at the warehouse tonight." I hung up and looked at the screen where my empty bedroom stared back at me. I felt a pang of sorrow for the woman who used to sleep there, but it was fleeting. That woman was gone. The person who remained was a stranger who had just signed her own arrest warrant. Desperation has a specific smell. It smells like unwashed clothes, stale sweat, and adrenaline. Through the lens of my hidden cameras, I watched that desperation consume Julian Thorne. The smooth, confident venture capitalist who had charmed my wife at the charity gala was gone. In his place was a frantic, cornered animal. The private investigator's report had been accurate, but it was lagging behind reality. Julian's gambling debts were not just passive numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. They were active threats. On Thursday afternoon, while I was at my office pretending to work, I watched a scene unfold in my living room that chilled my blood. Julian was pacing back and forth on my Persian rug, his phone pressed to his ear. He was shouting. "I do not have it today," he screamed into the phone. "I told you I need 48 hours. The deal is closing. You touch me again, and I swear to God." He listened for a moment, and his face went pale. He lowered the phone slowly, his hand trembling. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees, looking terrified. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He spun around, his eyes wild. "It does not matter who it was. What matters is that we are out of time, Sarah. We cannot wait for him to slip up. We cannot wait for a divorce settlement. We need that money now." He walked over to her and grabbed her by the shoulders. He was not gentle. I saw her wince. "The notebook, Sarah," he hissed. "The one you found. $2.2 million in bearer bonds. That is liquid cash. Do you understand? We can walk into a bank in the Cayman Islands and cash those out, no questions asked." "But the warehouse is locked," Sarah stammered. "Charles has keys that I do not know where they are." "We do not need keys," Julian roared, shoving her back against the cushions. "We are taking it." I leaned back in my office chair, steepling my fingers. This was it. Conspiracy to commit burglary. I switched the audio feed to a higher gain to ensure every word was captured clearly. Julian began to outline the plan. It was crude, violent, and sloppy, the plan of a desperate junkie, not a criminal mastermind. He told her to rent a truck. Not a moving van, but a nondescript white panel van. He told her to use cash for the deposit so it could not be traced back to her credit cards immediately. "I will get the tools," Julian said, pacing again. I saw a hardware store on 4th Avenue. "I need a bolt cutter, a big one, 36 inches. That will snap a padlock like a twig, and a crowbar, just in case the door is jammed." Sarah looked horrified. "Julian, that is breaking and entering. That is a crime." "It is not a crime if it is your husband," he argued, using that twisted logic he excelled at. "It is marital property, Sarah. You have a right to access it. We are just forcing the access. Once we have the bonds, we leave. We go straight to the airport. I have the tickets on hold, first class to Zurich." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the coffee table. "And this," he said. "This is for afterward." "What is it?" Sarah asked, picking it up gingerly. "Divorce papers," he said. "My lawyer drafted them. Total capitulation. You demand full custody of the assets, alimony, the house, everything. We will leave them on the kitchen counter. When Charles realizes the money is gone and you are gone, he will be broken. He will sign anything just to make the pain stop." I watched Sarah open the envelope. She read the first page. I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a momentary struggle between her conscience and her greed. She looked at the papers. Then she looked at Julian, sweaty, manic, terrifying Julian. "Okay," she whispered. My heart did not break this time. It hardened. She had agreed to rob me. She had agreed to destroy me legally and financially. She had crossed the line from unfaithful wife to co-conspirator. I saved the video file and encrypted it. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Detective Miller. "They are moving," I said. "They are planning to hit the warehouse. They are buying bolt cutters." "I will have a patrol car on standby near the industrial park," Miller replied, his voice professional and grim. "But, Charles, you know the law. We cannot arrest them for talking about it. They have to actually do it. They have to break the seal." "I know," I said. "I will make sure the stage is set." That afternoon, I left work early. I told my secretary I had a migraine. I drove straight to the warehouse. I had one final layer of security, to install one that was not for keeping people out, but for ensuring they never forgot getting in. I installed a new set of cameras. These were not the standard security feeds. These were high-definition infrared cameras hidden in the rafters, capable of capturing clear images in total darkness. I wanted their faces to be perfectly visible when the realization hit them. I also wired the door. I connected a magnetic contact sensor to a silent alarm system. The moment the integrity of the metal roll-up door was compromised, the moment it was lifted more than 6 inches, a signal would be sent directly to the local police precinct dispatch, with a Priority 1 robbery in progress code. Detective Miller had arranged for this specific flag to be on the address. There would be no phone call to verify, just a dispatch of units. I spent an hour reinforcing the trap. I checked the batteries. I checked the angles. Then I walked to the center of the room. The space was filled with my tarp-covered prototypes. In the dim light, they looked ominous, like sleeping giants. I walked past them to the back wall where the empty floor safe sat. I had already placed the fake documents inside, but I felt the need for one last gesture, a signature. I took a piece of heavy cream cardstock and a fountain pen. I sat on a crate and wrote a letter. It was not long. I did not want to rant. I wanted to haunt them. Sarah, you always wanted to know the value of what was in this warehouse. You thought it was measured in gold or cash. You were wrong. The value here was my dreams, my hard work, and the future I wanted to build for us. You traded that reality for a cheap fantasy, sold by a man who does not love you. The safe is empty, Sarah, just like your promises, just like your marriage. I hope the silence you find in here is loud enough to wake you up. Goodbye, Charles. I placed the letter on top of the safe, weighting it down, with a small rusted iron bolt from my father's collection. It was poetic in a way only I would understand. I left the warehouse at 5 in the afternoon, locking the heavy padlock on the outside. It was a strong lock, but a 36-inch bolt cutter would slice through it in seconds. I was counting on it. I drove home, my stomach churning with a mix of nausea and anticipation. I had to perform one last act. I had to clear the field. When I walked into the house, the air was thick with tension. Sarah was in the kitchen chopping vegetables with a frantic, jerky rhythm. She jumped when I entered. "Hey," I said, loosening my tie. "Sorry I am late." She turned, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "It is okay. I was just starting dinner." I walked over and kissed her on the cheek. Her skin was cold. She smelled of nervous sweat and expensive perfume. I have some news, I said, opening the refrigerator to grab a water. A problem came up at the Portland site. Structural issues with the foundation pouring. I have to go down there. Sarah stopped chopping. She turned to me, the knife still in her hand. When tonight? I said. I am going to pack a bag and drive down after dinner. I will probably be gone 3 days, maybe 4. I need to oversee the new concrete mix personally. I watched her face closely. For a split second there was a flash of pure, unadulterated joy. It lit up her eyes before she could mask it. It was the look of a prisoner seeing the guard fall asleep. "Oh, Charles, that is terrible," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You work so hard, but you have to do what you have to do." "Yeah," I sighed, leaning against the counter. "It is a pain, but it means the house is all yours for the weekend. And the warehouse, obviously. I was going to stop by there and grab some tools, but I do not have time. It will have to sit unguarded for a few days." I saw her throat muscles constrict as she swallowed. I had just handed her the permission slip. I had told her the coast was clear. We sat down to dinner 10 minutes later. It was a surreal experience. We ate pot roast and mashed potatoes, the ultimate comfort food, while a criminal conspiracy hung in the air between us. Sarah ate quickly, her leg bouncing under the table. She kept glancing at the clock. "So where will you stay in Portland?" she asked. "The Marriott downtown," I lied. "I will text you when I get there. It is a long drive, so I probably won't be checking my phone much until tomorrow morning." "Perfect," she said. "I mean drive safely." I finished my meal and went upstairs to pack. I threw some clothes into a duffel bag, making sure to make noise. I wanted her to hear the zipper. I wanted her to hear the reality of my departure. At 7:30, I carried my bag to the front door. Sarah stood in the hallway, her arms crossed. She looked like she was vibrating. "I will see you in a few days," I said. "I love you, Charles," she said. It was the final lie, the last nail in the coffin. "I love you too, Sarah," I replied. And for the first time in months, I felt no guilt about lying back. I did not love this woman. I loved the memory of who she was. This woman standing before me was a stranger, holding a knife behind her back. I walked out to the car, threw the bag in the back seat, and backed out of the driveway. I waved as I pulled away. She waved back, standing in the illuminated doorway of the home I had paid for, wearing the clothes I had bought her. I drove down the street, turned the corner, and immediately killed the headlights. I circled the block and parked 3 streets over, in a spot where I had a clear line of sight to the main road, leading out of the neighborhood, but where my car would not be noticed. I pulled out my laptop and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. I brought up the interior camera feed of the house. Sarah was not crying over my departure. She was not cleaning up dinner. She was standing in the middle of the living room, typing furiously on her phone. I watched the screen as the text message bubble appeared on the spyware interface I had installed. It was a message to Julian. 2 words. 2 words that sealed her fate and ended my life as I knew it. "He is gone. Tonight. Let's do it." I closed the laptop lid halfway, casting a blue glow on my face in the dark car. The game was over. The hunt was on. I started the engine and began the slow, quiet drive toward the warehouse district. I had to get there before they did. I had to take my seat in the front row for the end of the world. The drive away from my house was the longest commute of my life, even though I was technically going nowhere. I drove toward the interstate, merging onto the highway south, toward Portland, just in case Sarah was tracking my phone's GPS location. I stayed on the highway for 10 miles, watching the rain smear the red taillights of the semi-trucks ahead of me into bloody streaks on the windshield. At the first exit past the city limits, I pulled off. I found a quiet gas station, bought a burnt coffee that tasted like ash, and disabled the location services on my phone. Then, I turned the car around. I did not go back to the suburbs. I navigated the back roads, the industrial arteries of the city that pump goods and services, while the rest of the world sleeps. The warehouse district is a ghost town at night, a landscape of corrugated metal, chain-link fences, and shadows that seem to have physical weight. I knew every alley and every blind spot in this area. I had spent 10 years coming here to build my dreams. Now I was here to watch them dismantle my nightmare. I parked my Volvo in a narrow service alley between a defunct textile factory and a collision repair shop. It was about 200 yards from Warehouse 404, close enough to intervene if things went spiraling out of control, but far enough to remain invisible. The vantage point was perfect. A pile of discarded pallets and a rusted dumpster shielded my car from the main access road. I killed the engine, and the silence rushed in heavy and oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the Seattle rain on the roof. I opened my laptop and placed it on the passenger seat. The screen glowed to life, casting a pale, ghostly blue light across the leather interior. I connected to the secure network I had established. The screen split into a grid of 4 feeds. 2 exterior cameras covering the front and back of the warehouse, and 2 interior cameras, 1 wide angle covering the floor, and 1 high-definition lens focused directly on the safe. The time was 11:45 at night. The stage was set. The audience of one had arrived. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the dark, sipping the cold coffee, watching the empty screen. It is a strange thing to wait for a crime to happen. You feel a mix of dread and anticipation. I found myself checking the time every 30 seconds. Midnight passed. Then 1 o'clock in the morning. The rain intensified, turning the dirt of the alley into a slurry of mud. My breath fogged the windows, forcing me to wipe them down periodically with my sleeve, to maintain a clear view of the real world outside, though the digital world on my screen was far more important. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, a pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the industrial park. I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. The vehicle was moving slowly, prowling. As it turned onto the street leading to my warehouse, the headlights cut out. Whoever was driving killed the lights, plunging the vehicle into darkness. It was a classic amateur move, trying to be stealthy but actually making the vehicle more dangerous to navigate on a potholed road. It was reckless. It was Julian. On my exterior camera feed, the vehicle materialized out of the gloom. It was a white cargo van, boxy, and dented the kind you rent by the hour from shady lots near the airport. It rolled to a stop directly in front of the rolling metal door of Warehouse 404. The engine idled for a moment, sending plumes of white exhaust into the cold night air, and then died. The driver's side door opened. Julian Thorne stepped out. Even in the graininess of the night vision camera, he looked agitated. He was dressed in black jeans and a black hoodie with leather gloves that looked brand new. He scanned the perimeter, his head snapping left and right. He looked like a caricature of a cat burglar. He walked around to the passenger side and yanked the door open. Sarah stepped out. Seeing her on that screen hit me harder than I expected. She was wearing a dark raincoat and a beanie hat pulled low over her blonde hair. She looked small. She looked terrified. She hesitated by the open door of the van, hugging herself against the chill. Julian did not offer comfort. He grabbed her arm hard and pulled her toward the warehouse door. I saw her stumble slightly, struggling to keep her footing on the wet pavement. They stood before the massive steel door. To them, it was a barrier standing between poverty and a life of luxury. To me, it was the mouth of a beast. Julian reached into the back of the van and pulled out the bolt cutters. They were massive, the handles bright yellow, screaming out in the monochrome feed. He handed a heavy flashlight to Sarah. Shine it on the lock. I could almost hear him hiss, though the exterior camera had no audio. Sarah fumbled with the light. The beam danced erratically over the rusted metal before settling on the heavy padlock I had secured earlier that day. Julian stepped forward. He raised the bolt cutters, his jaw set tight. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead even in the cool night air. This was manual labor, something I doubted Julian had done in years. He maneuvered the jaws of the cutter around the shackle of the lock. I watched his face contort with effort. He squeezed the handles. The muscles in his neck stood out like cords. The lock was hardened steel. It was not going to give up easily. He grunted, shifting his weight, putting his entire body into the leverage. Snap. The sound was not audible through the screen, but I saw the reaction. The lock sprang open, falling from the latch, and hitting the concrete. Julian stumbled forward with the release of tension, almost dropping the cutters. He recovered quickly, a manic grin spreading across his face. He picked up the broken lock and hurled it into the darkness of the parking lot. He turned to Sarah and said something. She nodded, her body language stiff and fearful. She was looking around, expecting police sirens, expecting a trap. She was right to be afraid, but she was looking in the wrong direction. I sat in my car, my hand hovering over my phone. I had the number for the dispatch contact pre-dialed. All I had to do was press send. But not yet. Breaking the lock was destruction of property. I wanted them inside. I wanted them to cross the legal threshold of burglary. Julian bent down, grabbed the handle at the bottom of the rolling door, and heaved. The door was heavy, ungreased, and loud. I imagined the screech of metal on metal, echoing through the empty industrial park, like a banshee's wail. He lifted it to waist height, then shoulder height. He locked it in place. The black maw of the warehouse yawned open before them. Go, Julian gestured with his head. Sarah hesitated. He shoved her. She stumbled into the darkness. He followed, pulling a second flashlight from his belt. I switched my attention to the interior camera feeds. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows. The high windows were painted over, blocking out the streetlights. The only illumination came from the chaotic, sweeping beams of their flashlights. The lights cut through the dust motes, dancing in the air, creating solid bars of white in the blackness. They moved tentatively at first. The floor was concrete stained with oil and sawdust. "Where is it?" I heard Julian's voice. Through the interior audio feed now. It was distorted, echoing off the metal walls. "Where is the money?" The flashlight beams swept over the center of the room. This was where I had arranged my life's work. The prototypes for the modular housing units stood like silent sentinels under their heavy canvas tarps. They were large, bulky shapes, roughly the size of pallets of cash or crates of bullion. Julian ran to the nearest one. He ripped the corner of the tarp back with a violent motion. He did not find stacks of $100 bills. He found a complex lattice of sustainable timber and recycled aluminum. He froze. He shined the light on it, confused. "What is this?" he muttered. "It is wood. It is just wood." He ran to the next tarp. He tore it off completely. Underneath was a detailed architectural model of a futuristic eco-village encased in plexiglass. "Toys," he screamed, his voice cracking. "He is keeping toys in here." Sarah was standing near the entrance, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Julian, maybe we should go. Maybe it is not here." "It has to be here," Julian roared, spinning around. The beam of his light caught Sarah in the face, blinding her for a second. He wrote it in the book. 2.2 million, you saw it. He began to run down the aisles of shelving. He swept his arm across a shelf, sending rolls of blueprints and canisters of drafting supplies crashing to the floor. The sound was explosive. "Where are you hiding it, you cheap bastard?" he yelled at the empty room. I watched impassively. His unraveling was proceeding exactly as predicted. A narcissist denied his prize does not reflect. He destroys. Then his flashlight beam hit the back wall. It caught the reflection of the black metal box sitting alone in the center of the rear clearance area. The safe. It was an old floor model, heavy, intimidating, and unmistakably secure. I had polished the dial, so it gleamed in the light. To a desperate man, it looked like the Holy Grail. Julian stopped breathing. I saw his shoulders drop as the tension released, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated greed. "There," he whispered. He turned to Sarah, his eyes wide and manic. "It is in the safe. Christ, Sarah, look it. Is in the safe, of course it is. He wouldn't just leave cash sitting out on a table. He locked it up. He sprinted toward the safe. He moved with a speed I did not think he possessed. He dropped to his knees in front of the metal box, caressing the cold steel like it was a lover. "Bring the light," he commanded Sarah. "Come here." Sarah walked slowly toward him. She looked at the architectural models as she passed them. She paused for a second at a model of a hospital wing, a project I had worked on for 2 years. She reached out and touched the plexiglass. I wondered in that second if she remembered me talking about it over dinner, back when she still pretended to listen. "Sarah," Julian shouted. She snapped out of her trance and hurried to his side, shining her light on the dial. Okay, Julian panted. He was shaking. He put his ear against the metal door like he had seen in the movies. But he did not know how to crack a safe. He was a con man, not a safe cracker. He pulled back, frustrated. "What is the combination?" "Did he write it down?" "No," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "The book just said safe. It did not have numbers." "Think," Julian yelled, grabbing her wrist. "He is a simple man. He is boring. He uses numbers that mean something." "What is his birthday?" "August 12th, Sarah said instantly. Julian spun the dial. "Right to 8, left to 12. "Back to what year?" 1984, she said. He spun to 84. He yanked the handle. Locked. "Damn it," he cursed, hitting the safe with his fist. Okay, what else?" "Our anniversary, June 4th, she whispered. He tried it. 06 04 2011. He pulled the handle. Nothing. He was hyperventilating now. He stood up and kicked the safe. It did not budge. It was bolted to the concrete floor. "It has to be something stupid," he muttered. "Something he cares about." He looked at Sarah. His eyes narrowed. "You," he said. "He was obsessed with you. Before us? He tried to buy you." "Try your birthday," Julian commanded. Sarah swallowed hard. January 27th. Julian knelt back down. His hands were sweating so much he had to wipe them on his pants. He gripped the dial. He spun it clockwise to 01. He spun it counterclockwise to 27. He spun it clockwise again to 1988. The click of the tumblers aligning was audible, even over the low-quality microphone. It was a mechanical sound, crisp and final. Julian grabbed the handle. He looked at Sarah one last time, a grin stretching across his face that was more skull than human. "We are rich, baby," he whispered. He pulled the handle down. The heavy bolts retracted with a clunk. The door of the safe swung open. I pressed the button on my phone. "Dispatch, this is a priority call," I said calmly into the dark of my car. "Robbery in progress at warehouse, 404. Suspects are inside. They are armed with a crowbar and bolt cutters." I hung up and watched the screen. Julian reached into the dark void of the safe. He expected to feel the cool, heavy stack of gold bars. He expected the crisp texture of bonds. His hand came out holding a single, thin white envelope. He froze. He shone the flashlight into the safe. Empty. The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. It was the silence of a heart stopping. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Julian ripped the envelope open. He pulled out the papers. The divorce decree, the trust fund transfer confirmation, and the handwritten note on the cream cardstock. He read the first line of the bank transfer. Balance 0. He dropped the papers as if they were burning his fingers. He picked up the note. "Read it," I whispered to the screen. "Read it and weep." I saw his eyes scanning my handwriting. I saw the color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. He did not scream. He did not rage. He just stopped. The reality of the trap crashed down on him with the weight of the collapsing roof he had helped engineer. Sarah picked up the divorce papers from the floor. She saw my signature at the bottom. She saw the date. He knew, she whispered. "Oh my God, Julian!" He knew everything. Julian looked up. He looked straight into the camera lens hidden in the rafters, as if he could feel my gaze burning through the digital connection. "He is watching," Julian said, his voice hollow. "He is watching us right now." And for the first time that night, Julian Thorne was absolutely right. The safe door was open, gaping like a toothless mouth mocking the man who had just violated it. From my vantage point in the darkened car huddled over the glowing screen of my laptop, I watched the tableau of greed unravel with a grim satisfaction that tasted like cold iron. Julian Thorne was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a narcissist who believed the universe owed him a living. When he saw the empty interior of that steel box, his brain simply refused to process the visual data. It was a glitch in his reality. He did not just stand there. He dove in. He fell to his knees, thrusting his hands into the void, feeling the back of the safe, the sides, the ceiling. He was looking for a false bottom, a hidden panel, a secret switch, anything that would make the fantasy real again. He clawed at the metal lining his fingernails, screeching against the steel, a sound that the high-sensitivity microphones picked up and transmitted to my earbuds as a piercing shriek. "It is not empty," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched hysteria. "It cannot be empty. You said he had millions, you said it was liquid." He grabbed the few papers I had left inside the decoy documents and the single USB drive I had planted, and threw them onto the dirty concrete floor. He was shaking, vibrating with a chaotic energy that was terrifying to behold. He picked up the flashlight and smashed it against the side of the safe, denting the casing. The light flickered, but stayed on, casting frantic strobe-like shadows across the cavernous warehouse. While Julian descended into madness, Sarah drifted away. It was a strange reaction. Perhaps it was shock. Perhaps it was the realization that she had just committed a felony for nothing. She wandered away from the safe, her flashlight beam trailing lazily across the room. She moved toward the center of the warehouse where my prototype stood under the tarps that Julian had partially ripped away. I switched the camera feed to the wide-angle lens to follow her. She stopped in front of the main model for the Hive project. It was a massive, intricate architectural model, scaled perfectly, detailing a sustainable modular housing community. I had spent 3 years building it by hand, gluing tiny pieces of balsa wood, soldering miniature LED lights, painting the landscape with brushes the size of eyelashes. It was a masterpiece of design, a physical manifestation of my philosophy that affordable housing could be beautiful and dignified. Sarah reached out and touched the edge of the model. She ran her finger along the roofline of a miniature community center. I saw her pause. She leaned in closer. For 15 years, she had ignored my work. She had called it playing with blocks. She had never stepped foot in this warehouse because she thought it was a dusty man cave. Now, stripped of her pretenses, standing in the cold dampness of a crime scene, she was finally seeing it. She saw the complexity. She saw the care. She saw the millions of dollars of potential licensing fees that she had dismissed as a hobby. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the gold she was looking for was not metal. It was mind. It was talent. And she had traded a man who could build this for a man who could only break things. Julian's voice shattered her moment of clarity. "Where is it?" he roared. I switched back to the safe view. Julian was standing now, kicking the heavy steel door of the safe. He turned and saw Sarah staring at the model. The sight of her distraction seemed to snap the last tether of his sanity. "Are you looking at dolls?" he screamed, storming toward her. "We are facing 20 years in prison and you are looking at dolls." He grabbed her by the shoulder and spun her around. The force of it made her drop her flashlight. It rolled away, the beam spinning dizzily across the floor. "You lied to me." Julian spat his face inches from hers. "You said he was hoarding cash. You said he was skimming. I thought he was," Sarah stammered, shrinking back from him. "The notebook, the entries." "The notebook was a plant," Julian yelled. He grabbed his hair, pulling at it. "Don't you get it, you stupid woman? He played us." "He played you." There is no money. There never was. He was pacing now, a caged tiger. He saw the USB drive lying on the floor where he had thrown it. A flicker of hope crossed his face, the desperate, illogical hope of a gambler down to his last chip. The drive, he muttered. Maybe it is crypto. Maybe the keys are on the drive. He scrambled on the floor, snatching up the small silver thumb drive. He looked around wildly. "I need a computer," he shouted. "Is there a computer in this dump?" Sarah pointed a trembling hand toward a workbench in the corner. There was an old laptop sitting there open. It was my field laptop, a rugged machine I used for running diagnostic software on the prototypes. I had left it there on purpose. I had set the power settings to never sleep and plugged it into the mains. The screen was black, a screensaver, but it was alive. Julian sprinted to the workbench. He jammed the USB drive into the port. He hit the spacebar to wake the machine. The screen flared to life. But it did not open a file explorer. It did not ask for a password. I had written a simple script. As soon as the mouse moved or a key was pressed, it would execute a video file. I had prepared the file 2 days ago, compiling the footage Reynolds, my private investigator, had obtained. It was a greatest hits collection of Julian Thorne's depravity. Julian froze as the video player expanded to full screen. The audio, amplified by the external speakers I had connected to the laptop, boomed through the quiet warehouse. It was footage from a bar, a grainy covert recording likely taken from a button camera on Reynolds's coat. Julian was sitting in a booth holding a martini. He was laughing with another man, a known associate of his in the con game. "She is a classic mark," the Julian on the screen said, taking a sip of his drink. 38, fading, looks insecure as hell. Her husband is this boring architect guy, quiet, loaded. I just had to flash a little smile, tell her she looks like a movie star, and she melted. In the warehouse, the real Julian stood paralyzed, watching his own digital ghost confess. Sarah walked slowly toward the workbench, drawn by the sound of her lover's voice. She stood behind him, her eyes wide fixed on the screen. But the best part, the digital Julian continued laughing, is that she thinks we are running away together. She actually thinks I am going to take her to Europe. Can you imagine me with that anchor around my neck? The other man on the screen laughed. So what is the plan? We drain the husband, Julian said, winking. Get access to the accounts or find his stash. Once the money is in my offshore, I ghost her. Leave her holding the bag. She is so desperate for attention, she will probably sign the confession herself. She sounds pathetic, the other man said. She is a cow, Julian said, his face twisting into a sneer of pure contempt. A stupid aging cow who thinks she is still a calf. It is almost too easy. I almost feel bad for the husband. Almost. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the warehouse was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, sucking the air out of the room. Sarah made a sound. It was a low, wounded noise like an animal that has been kicked in the stomach. She looked at the back of Julian's head, the man she had destroyed her marriage for, the man she had betrayed her vows for, the man she was willing to go to prison for. He had called her a cow. He had planned to leave her with nothing. Julian turned around slowly. He did not look ashamed. He looked cornered. His face was a mask of fury. He had been exposed, stripped naked of his charm and his lies. And like all narcissists, when the mirror is held up to them, they do not reflect. They attack. Turn it off, he growled. Sarah stared at him, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She whispered, You never loved me. It was all a lie. Julian laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. Love. You think people like us can afford love? You were a job, Sarah. You were an ATM with a pulse, and you turned out to be broken. He took a step toward her. Sarah backed away, but she tripped over a coil of extension cord and fell hard onto the concrete. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from him. You are a monster, she sobbed. And you are a fool, Julian screamed. He lunged at her. He did not help her up, he did not apologize. He pulled his arm back and struck her. It was a backhanded slap delivered with all the force of his frustration and rage. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was sickeningly loud, a sharp crack that echoed off the steel walls. Sarah's head snapped to the side. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching her cheek. She curled into a ball, whimpering. I watched from the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run in there to tear him apart. But I forced myself to stay. The police were minutes away. If I went in now, it would be a brawl. I needed him to be the aggressor. I needed the law to see him as the threat. Julian stood over her, breathing heavily. He looked around the room, his eyes wild. He kicked a stack of blueprints, sending paper flying. "Useless," he screamed. "You are useless. Where is the money?" He turned back to the safe. He saw the papers he had thrown on the floor, the ones he had ignored in his search for gold. He picked them up, crumbling them in his fist. He smoothed out the top sheet. It was the asset statement from my bank. He read it aloud, his voice trembling with disbelief. Transfer to the Veterans Housing Initiative. Amount $1,450,000. Date yesterday. He flipped to the next page. Stock portfolio liquidation. Beneficiary the Homeless Shelter Trust. Irrevocable. He dropped the paper. He looked at the last document. The divorce decree. It was already signed by me. He looked at Sarah, who was lying on the floor, holding the paper. She had picked up the one with the transfer details. She was reading it through her swollen eye. He gave it away. Julian whispered, the horror finally sinking in. He gave it all away. There is nothing left. He looked at me, or rather, he looked at the camera in the rafters again. He knew I had done this. He knew I had burned the kingdom to the ground rather than let him take the throne. He turned back to Sarah. The blame shifted instantly. In his twisted mind, this was her fault. If she had been faster, if she had been smarter, they would have won. "You did this," he hissed, advancing on her again. "You waited too long. You hesitated." Sarah held up the paper in her hand. It was the divorce decree. She looked at the date. She looked at the signature. Charles had signed it 2 days ago, before she had even agreed to the heist. He knew, she sobbed, her voice breaking. He knew before we even started. Julian reached down and grabbed her by the lapels of her coat, hauling her to her feet. He shook her violently. "Fix it!" he screamed, spit flying into her face. "Call him! Call him right now and tell him to reverse it. Tell him you were kidnapped. Tell him anything. I cannot," she wailed. "It is irrevocable. It is gone, Julian. It is all gone." He threw her back against the workbench. She hit the edge with a sickening thud and slid down to the floor. Julian grabbed the crowbar from the floor. He held it in his hand, weighing it. He looked at Sarah. Then he looked at the architectural models, my life's work. "If I cannot have the money," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble, "then nobody gets anything." He raised the crowbar and brought it down on the model of the eco-village. Plastic shattered. Wood splintered. He swung again and again, destroying the miniature world I had built. Sarah watched him, her eyes dead. She wasn't seeing him destroy a model. She was watching him destroy the last remnants of her delusion. The man she thought was a savior was just a vandal. The life she thought she wanted was just debris on a warehouse floor. I reached for my phone. The dispatch operator was still on the line, listening to the chaos. "Officer," I said, my voice cold and steady. "The suspect has become violent. He has assaulted the female accomplice. He is armed with a crowbar. He is destroying the property." "Units are 1 minute out, sir," the operator replied. "Do not engage." I hung up. I watched the screen. Julian was panting, standing amidst the wreckage of my work. He turned to Sarah. He raised the crowbar again. But this time he wasn't looking at a model. He was looking at her. She was the witness. She was the loose end. Sarah looked up at him. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just looked at him with a profound, crushing realization. She had lost her husband. She had lost her home. She had lost her dignity. And now, staring at the man she had ruined her life for, she realized she might lose her life too. Julian took a step toward her. "Get up," he commanded. "We are leaving. You are going to drive the van. And if you say one word to the cops," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The crowbar in his hand said everything. Sarah stood up slowly, using the workbench for support. She wiped the blood from her lip. She looked at the laptop screen where the video had ended, leaving a frozen image of Julian laughing. Then she looked at the real Julian. "No," she whispered. "What did you say?" Julian hissed. "No," Sarah said louder. She stood straighter. "I am not going anywhere with you." Julian's eyes widened. He raised the crowbar. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. At that moment, a siren wailed in the distance, cutting through the heavy rain. Then another. Then a third. Julian froze. His head snapped toward the door. The red and blue lights began to dance against the high windows of the warehouse, painting the walls in strokes of emergency. He looked at Sarah. He looked at the back door. Panic replaced the rage. He dropped the crowbar. "Run," he whispered to himself. He turned and bolted toward the rear exit, leaving Sarah standing alone in the center of the ruins, surrounded by the shattered pieces of the life she had chosen to destroy. The wail of the sirens in the distance should have sent Julian Thorne sprinting into the rainy night. Any rational criminal would have cut their losses, vanished into the shadows of the industrial park, and lived to scam another day. But Julian was not rational. He was a narcissist undergoing a catastrophic collapse of his ego. I watched on my laptop screen, safe in the darkness of my car, as he reached the rear exit door. His hand touched the push bar, but he did not open it. He stopped. He turned around. His eyes were not looking at the exit anymore. They were fixed on the workbench, where my rugged field laptop sat, its screen still glowing with the frozen image of his own face mocking Sarah. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was not just losing the money. He was losing the narrative. He was being recorded. He was being watched. And in his twisted mind, the source of his pain was not his own greed, but that machine. He roared a sound that distorted the audio feed into a jagged burst of static and charged back toward the center of the room. He snatched the laptop off the workbench. He raised it high above his head and brought it down on the corner of the steel table. The screen shattered. Keys flew into the air like plastic confetti. He didn't stop. He smashed it again and again, grunting with every blow until the device was nothing but twisted metal and sparking wires. I sat in my car shaking my head. "You idiot!" I whispered to the empty air. He thought destroying the terminal would destroy the evidence. He did not understand the cloud. He did not understand that the video file, the audio of his confession, and the footage of him striking Sarah had already been uploaded to 3 separate secure servers. He was destroying a $3,000 computer, but he was cementing a 20-year prison sentence. But the violence did not end with the hardware. Destroying the laptop seemed to unlock something primal in him. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. He looked at the shattered plastic on the floor. Then he looked at Sarah. She was still on the ground where he had shoved her, weeping, silently nursing her bruised cheek. She looked up at him, and for the first time I saw genuine terror in her eyes. Not the fear of getting caught, but the fear of dying. Julian marched over to her. He did not help her up. He grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked her to her feet. Sarah screamed a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the drone of the rain. "Get up!" Julian screamed. "You are not quitting on me, please!" "Julian," Sarah sobbed, clawing at his hand to loosen his grip. "You are hurting me." "The police are coming. We have to surrender." "Surrender." Julian laughed, and it was the sound of a man who had looked into the abyss and decided to jump. "I am not going to prison because you are too stupid to find the money." He dragged her toward the center of the room directly under the main camera I had installed in the rafters. He knew I was watching. He looked up, staring directly into the lens. His face was contorted sweat mixing with the dust of the warehouse. "Charles!" he bellowed. I flinched. Even though I was 200 yards away, hearing my name screamed with such vitriol made my skin crawl. "I know you are watching," Julian yelled, shaking Sarah like a rag doll. "I know you are getting off on this. You think you are so smart, don't you? You think you won?" He wrapped his arm around Sarah's neck, putting her in a chokehold. She gagged her hands, scrabbling uselessly at his forearm. "You listen to me, you cheap architect!" Julian screamed at the camera. "You transfer that money back. You hear me. You call the bank right now. You revoke that trust. I know you can do it." I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was delusional. An irrevocable trust is exactly that, irrevocable. Even if I wanted to, I could not reverse the transfer at 2 in the morning. The money was gone, but logic had left the building long ago. "I am not leaving here empty-handed," Julian shouted. "If I go down, she goes down. Transfer the money or I will snap her neck." The situation had shifted. This was no longer a burglary. This was a hostage situation, and I was the negotiator. I looked at the dashboard of my car. I had a decision to make. The police were close. I could hear the sirens getting louder maybe 2 minutes out. But 2 minutes is a lifetime when a maniac has his arm around your wife's throat. I could not let him hurt her. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the cruelty, I could not watch her die on a screen like a reality TV show. I needed to distract him. I needed to disorient him. I opened the control panel on my laptop software. My mouse hovered over the button labeled Panic Protocol. I clicked it. Inside the warehouse, hell broke loose. I had installed 4 industrial-grade sirens in the corners of the warehouse, the kind used for air raids or chemical spills. They erupted simultaneously. The sound was not just a noise. It was a physical force. It was 120 decibels of oscillating screeching that bounced off the metal walls, amplifying into a wall of sonic pain. At the same time, the strobe lights I had rigged to the alarm system began to flash. Blinding white light pulsed at a disorienting frequency, turning the warehouse into a chaotic, flickering nightmare. On the screen, I saw Julian recoil. He covered his ears with his hands, momentarily releasing his grip on Sarah. "Run, Sarah!" I yelled at the screen uselessly. Sarah stumbled away, covering her ears, disoriented by the strobes. She fell to her knees, crawling toward the exit. But Julian recovered faster than I expected. The chaos did not make him flee. It made him desperate. He realized that this assault on his senses was my doing. He realized I was not just watching. I was attacking. He reached into his pocket. My stomach dropped. I saw the glint of silver in the strobing light. It was a switchblade. I had not known he was armed. The private investigator's report said he was a con man, a fraudster, a non-violent offender. It did not say he carried a knife. Julian flicked his wrist. The blade snapped out 4 inches of sharpened steel. He lunged after Sarah. He caught her just a few feet from the door. He didn't just grab her this time. He grabbed her from behind and pressed the blade against the soft skin of her throat. "Stop it!" he screamed, his voice barely audible over the sirens. "Stop the noise or—" I slit her throat. I slammed my hand onto the stop key on my laptop. The sirens cut out instantly. The silence that followed was ringing and heavy. The strobe light ceased, leaving the warehouse bathed only in the dim, steady glow of the emergency exit signs and the few remaining overhead lights. Julian stood there, panting, his chest heaving. He held Sarah tight against him. Her eyes were wide, fixed on nothing, paralyzed by the cold steel pressing into her neck. A small trickle of blood appeared where the tip of the knife had broken the skin. Not a deep cut, but a terrifying warning. He looked up at the camera again. His expression had changed. The manic energy was gone. replaced by the cold, dead look of a man who has nothing left to lose. "Come out, Charles," he whispered. The microphone picked it up perfectly. "I know you are close," Julian said, scanning the shadows of the warehouse, assuming I was hiding somewhere inside behind the crates. "You controlled the lights. You controlled the alarm. You are here." He pressed the knife harder. Sarah whimpered a low, broken sound. "Come out and face me," he hissed. "Bring your phone. Make the transfer. Or I swear to God I will open her up right here. You have 10 seconds. He began to count. 1. I looked at the police feed on my other monitor. The GPS trackers showed the patrol cars were turning onto the main industrial road. They were close. Maybe 60 seconds. 2. But Julian was not stable. If he heard the police enter the building before he saw me, he might panic. He might kill her just out of spite. He might use her as a human shield and things could go wrong. A SWAT team entry is chaotic. Bullets fly. Hostages die. 3. I looked at Sarah. I saw the woman who had once made me soup when I was sick. I saw the woman who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. I saw the woman who had cheated on me, humiliated me, and tried to rob me. 4. Did she deserve to die for it? No. No one deserves that. 5. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I looked old. But I did not look like a coward. I was the architect of this trap. It was my responsibility to make sure the walls did not fall on the wrong person. 6. I grabbed the door handle of my Volvo. 7. I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs. I grabbed the pepper spray canister. I had bought a small, pathetic weapon against a knife, but it was all I had. 8. I opened the car door. 9. I stepped out into the rain. I slammed the door shut. I did not run away. I ran toward the warehouse. 10. I am coming, I screamed as I ran toward the open rolling door, my voice echoing off the wet pavement. I am here, Julian. Don't hurt her. I sprinted across the gap between the alley and the warehouse entrance. The rain soaked me instantly, plastering my hair to my forehead. I ran into the open maw of the loading dock, into the light, into the trap I had built. I skidded to a halt, 10 feet away from them. Julian spun toward me, dragging Sarah with him. The knife remained at her throat. He looked at me and a sick, triumphant smile spread across his face. There he is, Julian sneered. The little architect, the man behind the curtain. Charles Sarah choked out tears streaming down her face. Run! He is crazy. I raised my hands slowly, showing my empty palms. I kept the pepper spray hidden in my right sleeve, tucked against my wrist. Let her go, Julian, I said, my voice steady, though my knees were shaking. It is over. The police are outside. You can hear them. I don't care about the police, Julian shouted. I want my money. You stole it from me. I stole nothing, I said calmly, taking a half step forward. It was never yours. And it is not hers either. It belongs to the veterans now. Even if I wanted to, I cannot get it back. Liar. Julian screamed. He made a slashing motion with the knife dangerously close to Sarah's jugular. Use your phone. Call them. I do not have my phone, I lied. It is in the car. Then go get it, he yelled. I cannot, I said. Because if I turn around, you will hurt her. And I am not going to let you do that. You think you are a hero, Julian laughed, and it was a sound devoid of mirth. You are just a cuckold, Charles. A sad, lonely man who built a cage for his wife. Maybe, I said, taking another step. But at least I am not the one holding a knife to a woman's throat. I was closing the distance, 8 feet, 7 feet. I needed to get within 4 feet to use the spray effectively. I needed him to focus entirely on me. Look at me, Julian, I said, locking eyes with him. Forget her. She is useless to you. She has no money. She has no power. I am the one you hate. I am the one who beat you. His eyes narrowed. The bait was working. His narcissism could not resist the challenge. He loosened his grip on Sarah slightly, turning his body to face me more fully. You did not beat me, he spat. I can still take everything from you. I can take your life. He shoved Sarah aside. It was a violent, dismissive motion. She went sprawling onto the concrete. Julian stepped toward me, the knife held low, ready to gut me. "Just you and me, Charles," he whispered. I stood my ground. I waited. I watched his shoulder muscles bunch. I watched his eyes dilate. The sirens outside stopped. Not because they were turned off, but because the police had arrived. I saw the blue lights flashing against the open warehouse door behind me. Julian saw them too. He hesitated, and in that split second of hesitation, I made my move. Adrenaline is a strange chemical. It can make a split second feel like an hour, or it can make a rational man do something completely insane. Standing there in the rain 10 feet from a maniac with a knife, I realized the pepper spray in my sleeve was a joke. It was a toy. If I stepped closer, he would slice Sarah's throat before I could even raise my arm. I had made a calculation error. I needed leverage. I needed weight. I needed steel. I spun on my heel and sprinted back to the Volvo. "He is running," I heard Julian scream, his voice cracking with triumphant laughter. "Look at him run, Sarah." "Your hero is a coward." I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door. I did not reach for the ignition. The engine was already purring. I shifted the gear into drive. I did not just tap the gas. I stomped on it. The tires shrieked against the wet asphalt, a sound like a tearing sheet. I wrestled the wheel, aiming the heavy Swedish sedan directly at the gaping maw of the warehouse door. I drove straight at them. I saw Julian's eyes widen in the rearview camera of my mind. He froze, unsure if I was bluffing, or if I intended to turn him into roadkill. At the last possible second, I slammed on the brakes. The anti-lock braking system shuddered, the car diving forward, coming to a halt less than 6 feet from where they stood. I hit the high beams. The modern LED headlights of the Volvo were designed to illuminate dark highways, piercing through fog and rain. At this range, directed straight into human eyes, adapted to the dim warehouse light, they were a weapon. Julian screamed and threw a hand up to shield his face, momentarily blinded by the twin suns exploding in his vision. He stumbled back, dragging Sarah with him, but his grip loosened, just a fraction. I killed the engine, but left the lights blazing, pinning him in that cone of brilliance like an insect under a microscope. I opened the door and stepped out. I did not crouch. I did not hide behind the door. I walked around to the front of the car, standing in the harsh backscatter of the headlights. I raised both hands high in the air, palms open, showing him I held no weapon. I stood tall, my silhouette framed by the rain, and the light casting a long shadow that stretched over them. "Let her go, Julian," I said. My voice was not the voice of the husband who asked what was for dinner. It was not the voice of the architect discussing load-bearing walls. It was cold, flat, and absolute. It was the voice of a man who had already buried his marriage and was now just handling the paperwork. "The police are coming." I continued my gaze, locking onto his squinting, watering eyes. "You can hear them. Those sirens are not a bluff. You have exactly 3 minutes to run out the back door and disappear into the woods, or you can stay here and end your miserable life in a federal prison cell. It is your choice." Julian blinked rapidly, trying to clear the spots from his vision. He tightened his arm around Sarah's neck, pulling her up onto her tiptoes. She gasped, her hands clawing at his forearm. He pressed the knife against her skin again, a desperate, shaky threat. "Shut up!" Julian shrieked. He looked manic, his hair plastered to his forehead, his teeth bared. "You think you can scare me? You think I am afraid of cops?" He laughed, but it sounded like a sob. "I am not leaving without my money," he yelled. "I know you have it, Charles. You are too smart to give it all away. That bank transfer was a fake. It was a Photoshop job." He dragged Sarah forward, using her body as a shield against the light, against me, against the inevitable. "Transfer $5 million into this account, right now," he screamed, reciting a string of numbers. "Do it now, or I swear to God, I will paint this floor with her blood. I will kill her, Charles. I will kill her, and I will laugh while I do it. I looked at Sarah. For 15 years I had looked at that face across a dinner table, across a pillow, across a room full of people. I knew every line, every expression. But I had never seen her look at me like this. She was trembling, her knees buckling under her weight, held up only by the chokehold of her lover. Her eyes met mine through the blinding glare of the headlights. In them, I saw the collapse of her entire world. She saw the man she had called boring, the man she had called weak, the man she had betrayed for a fantasy. And she saw that man standing unarmed, in front of a knife, offering himself as a target to buy her time. I saw the shame wash over her. It was a physical thing, more painful than the blade at her throat. She realized in that terrifying moment of clarity that she had thrown away a diamond to pick up a piece of broken glass. I lowered my hands slowly, just an inch, keeping my demeanor calm. "There is no money, Julian," I said, shaking my head. "Liar," he screamed. "I am not lying," I said softly. And that warehouse, it was never about money. It was never about gold. I took a step forward, ignoring the knife. "For 6 months I have known who you are," I said. "I hired a private investigator the day you walked into my life. I know about the widows in Arizona. I know about the credit card fraud in Nevada. I know about the elderly teacher you swindled in Oregon." Julian froze. His mouth opened slightly. "This warehouse does not contain my fortune." I continued, my voice hard as granite. "It contains yours. Or rather, the evidence of how you stole yours. I have spent the last half year compiling every police report, every bank statement, every witness testimony from your past victims. It is all here, in the cloud, and on the hard drives of the FBI field office in Seattle." I checked my watch, a deliberate, arrogant gesture. "I sent the final packet 1 hour ago," I said. "They are not coming for a burglary, Julian. They are coming for a multi-state wire fraud and extortion suspect. Your life is over. The only question is whether you want to add murder to the indictment." The color drained from Julian's face so completely he looked like a wax figure. The knife in his hand wavered. The leverage had shifted. He wasn't robbing a rich husband anymore. He was staring down the barrel of his own history. He looked at the door, then at me, then at the empty darkness of the warehouse. He saw the walls closing in. "He is lying," he whispered, but the conviction was gone. "He is bluffing." "He is not," Sarah choked out. Julian looked down at her. "He never bluffs," Sarah whispered, tears spilling over. "He is an architect, Julian. He builds things to last. He destroyed you before you even touched the door. The insult from the woman he considered a pawn was the final straw." Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure reptilian hatred. He looked at me, then back at Sarah. He realized he had lost the money, lost the freedom, and lost the game. All he had left was spite. "Then I will take something you love," he snarled. He tensed his arm, preparing to drag the blade across Sarah's throat. But he had underestimated the woman he was holding. He had spent months convincing her she was weak, dependent, and foolish. He forgot that a cornered animal fights back. In the split second that Julian's focus shifted to his desire for blood, his grip on her neck shifted slightly. Sarah did not scream. She did not beg. She opened her mouth and clamped her teeth down on the fleshy part of his hand right between the thumb and forefinger. She bit him with all the force of her regret, all the fury of her betrayal. "Arg!" Julian screamed, the sound echoing off the metal roof. The pain was sharp and unexpected. Reflexively, he yanked his hand back. The knife slipped from Sarah's neck. Sarah dropped her weight, throwing herself backward and away from him. She hit the ground hard and scrambled on her hands and knees, crawling toward the side of the car, away from the monster. Julian looked at his hand, bleeding and throbbing. Then he looked at Sarah, scuttling away. Then he looked at me. I stood there calm, silent, witnessing his ruin. A guttural roar ripped from his throat. It was not human. It was the sound of a demon exorcised. He knew he could not catch her. He knew the police were seconds away. He knew his life was finished. He gripped the knife tighter, turning the blade outward. He locked eyes with me. "You!" he screamed. "You did this!" He lowered his shoulder and charged. He sprinted toward me, covering the distance in a heartbeat. He did not care about escape anymore. He only wanted to destroy the man who had outsmarted him. He wanted to wipe that calm look off my face with 4 inches of steel. I did not move. I did not flinch. I watched him come a blur of black rage in the headlights. I knew exactly where he would strike. I knew exactly what he was, and I was ready. Violence is often depicted in movies as a choreographed dance, a graceful exchange of blows that ends with the hero standing tall. In reality, violence is ugly, clumsy, and incredibly fast. Julian Thorne charged at me with the desperation of a man who saw his entire existence crumbling, and he intended to take me down into the rubble with him. He covered the 10 feet between us in a heartbeat, the knife held low, aimed at my stomach. He expected me to flinch. He expected me to run. He expected the quiet, boring architect to cower before his rage. But architects understand angles. We understand trajectory. And most importantly, we understand preparation. I did not retreat. As Julian lunged, thrusting the blade upward in a vicious arc, I pivoted on my left foot. It was not a martial arts move. It was a simple shift of weight I had practiced in my mind 100 times while watching him on the camera feed. His momentum carried him forward, his shoulder brushing against my chest, the knife slicing harmlessly through the empty air where my abdomen had been a split second before. He stumbled off balance, his chest exposed. I did not hesitate. I dropped my right arm, the one I had kept hidden, against my side. The small canister of law enforcement-grade pepper spray slid from my sleeve into my palm. I raised it, aimed for the center of his face, and depressed the trigger. A concentrated stream of orange chemical fire erupted from the nozzle. I did not spray and pray. I painted his face with it. The stream hit him directly in the eyes and nose from less than 2 feet away. The effect was instantaneous. Julian dropped the knife as if it had turned white hot. He threw his hands to his face, letting out a sound that I will never forget, a guttural, wet scream that tore through the sound of the rain. It was the sound of a predator instantly reduced to prey. He collapsed to his knees, then fell forward onto the wet asphalt, writhing in agony. He clawed at his eyes, gasping for air, as the capsaicin inflamed his respiratory tract. The bravado, the arrogance, the threats, all of it dissolved in a puddle of chemical tears and snot. "Stay down!" I said, my voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to ebb. Julian tried to rise, swinging blindly with his fists, but he was fighting a ghost. He was incapacitated, drowning in his own pain. At that exact moment, the world exploded in light and sound. The police cruisers I had summoned screeched into the warehouse lot, blocking the exit, their tires skipping over the wet pavement. Doors flew open. The stark, blinding beams of spotlights cut through the darkness, pinning us all against the backdrop of the warehouse. "Police, get on the ground. Show me your hands." The commands were shouted with the authority of men who do not ask twice. Officers in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn, moving with a synchronized efficiency that made Julian's amateur heist look even more pathetic. I immediately dropped to my knees, placing my hands behind my head, interlacing my fingers. I was the victim, but I knew the drill. In the chaos of a crime scene, everyone is a suspect until the handcuffs go on the right person. Officers swarmed Julian. He was still screaming, rolling on the ground. 2 officers grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back. I heard the metallic ratcheting of handcuffs, a sound of finality that signaled the end of Julian Thorne's career. "Get off me!" Julian sputtered, spitting blood and saliva onto the pavement. "Do you know who I am? I am a victim. He attacked me. That man attacked me. Shut your mouth." One of the officers barked, hauling him to his feet. Julian turned his head blindly. His eyes, swollen shut, his face, a mask of red irritation. "Charles, you set me up. This is entrapment. I will sue you. I will take everything." They dragged him away toward the back of a patrol car. He was still cursing, still blaming the universe for his failures, never once stopping to realize that he was the architect of his own destruction. I remained on my knees until a tall, uniformed officer approached me. It was the sergeant I had spoken to on the phone, the one Detective Miller had coordinated with. "Mr. Smith," he asked, lowering his weapon. "Yes," I said. "You can stand up, sir. We have the suspect secured." I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, as if my bones had turned to lead. I wiped the rain from my face and looked toward the warehouse entrance. Sarah was sitting on the ground near the front wheel of my car. She had not moved since the police arrived. She was drenched, her hair matted against her skull, her expensive coat ruined by the mud and oil of the industrial park. She was hugging her knees, rocking back and forth slightly. An officer was standing over her, asking her questions, but she was not answering. She was staring at me. I walked over to her. The officer stepped back slightly to let me pass, but kept his hand near his holster. "Sarah," I said quietly. She looked up. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears. The bruise on her cheek from where Julian had struck her was darkening a purple mark of shame. She looked incredibly small. For years, she had seemed so large in our house, her personality filling every room, her demands dictating the rhythm of our lives. Now stripped of her pretenses, she looked like a child who had broken a valuable vase and was waiting for the punishment. "Charles," she whispered, her voice cracking. I looked down at her. I waited for the anger to come. I waited for the rage that had fueled me for 6 months, the fire that had driven me to build this trap. But there was no fire. The tank was empty. "Charles, please," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand toward my pant leg. "I did not know. He forced me. I was scared." I took a half step back, putting her hand out of reach. "He did not force you to lie to me for 6 months?" "Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "He did not force you to photograph my private notebook. He did not force you to rent this van. You walked into this warehouse with your eyes open. You only closed them when you realized there was no gold." She flinched, as if I had slapped her. "I am sorry," she wailed, burying her face in her hands. "I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was so stupid. Please tell them. Tell them I am your wife. Tell them I was a victim." I looked at her, and I felt a profound sense of pity. It was the kind of pity you feel for an animal that has run into the road and been hit by a car. You wish it hadn't happened, but you know you cannot fix the broken bones. The love I had once held for her, the memory of our wedding day, the quiet mornings with coffee, the dreams we had shared, it was all gone. It had been strangled by her greed. The sergeant stepped forward, holding a notepad. "Mr. Smith, we have taken statements from the dispatch recordings and your initial report. We have the male suspect on charges of burglary, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, and extortion." He paused, looking down at Sarah, then back at me. "Regarding the female suspect, Mrs. Sarah Smith. She was found inside the premises. We found bolt cutters with her fingerprints on them near the van. She was observed by officers exiting the vehicle and entering the property." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide with desperation. It was the look of a drowning woman begging for a lifeline. All I had to do was speak. All I had to do was say she was coerced, that she was acting under duress, that I did not want to press charges. I could save her from prison. I could save her from the consequences of her actions. But if I did that, she would never learn. If I did that, I would just be enabling the same behavior that had led us here. She had made a choice to destroy me. Now, she had to live in the ruins she had helped create. She broke the lock. "Sergeant," I said, my voice steady. "She entered the premises with the intent to steal. She is his accomplice." Sarah let out a gasp that sounded like a dying breath. Charles, no. The sergeant nodded. He gestured to a female officer standing nearby. Place her under arrest. The female officer stepped forward. Sarah scrambled to her feet, trying to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back, the officer commanded. Sarah looked at me one last time. Her eyes were searching for the husband she had thrown away, hoping he was still in there somewhere. But that husband was gone. He had died the moment he heard her ask Julian for a divorce on the audio tape. Charles, she screamed as the officer grabbed her wrists. Charles, please, I love you. The handcuffs clicked. It was a sharp mechanical sound. Click, click. I watched as they led her away. She was stumbling, weeping uncontrollably, her head hanging low. They guided her to a separate patrol car from Julian. Even in arrest, they were separated. The toxic duo finally broken apart by the law. I stood in the rain until the door of the police car slammed shut, cutting off her sobs. I turned to the sergeant. I will come down to the station tomorrow to sign the formal complaints and provide the video evidence, I said. That will be fine, Mr. Smith, the sergeant said, touching the brim of his hat. You should go home. Get some rest. It is over. I nodded. It is over. I walked back to my Volvo. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the rain and the sirens and the chaos. The interior was quiet. It smelled of leather and the faint, lingering scent of the old coffee cup in the holder. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the red and blue lights of the police procession moving away, taking my wife and her lover to the precinct. I watched until the lights were just specks in the distance, and then I watched until they disappeared completely around the bend. I was alone. The warehouse stood dark and silent behind me, my sanctuary, my trap. It had served its purpose. I would have to come back tomorrow to clean up the mess, to salvage the broken models, to fix the door. But that was a job for tomorrow. For now, I had one last thing to do. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed the number of my lawyer, ignoring the fact that it was 3 a.m. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice groggy. Charles, is everything okay? It is done, Robert, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Robert knew the plan. He knew what tonight was. Did they? Robert started. They did, I interrupted. They are both in custody. The police have everything. A long sigh came over the line. I am sorry it came to this, Charles. Do not be, I said. I am not. I looked out the windshield at the empty industrial park. The rain was washing the street clean. Proceed with the filing, Robert, I said. I want the divorce fast-tracked. Cite criminal conduct and abandonment. And put the house on the market immediately. I do not want to spend another night in it. Where will you go? Robert asked. I do not know yet, I said. Maybe I will finally go to Europe. Maybe I will just get a small apartment in the city. But I am starting over. The trust fund for the veterans is active. I have my salary. I have my designs. That is enough. You are a strong man, Charles, Robert said. I am not strong, I said, starting the engine. I am just still standing. I hung up the phone and put the car in gear. As I drove away from Warehouse 404, I did not look back. I turned onto the main road, the streetlights guiding my way through the darkness. The silence in the car was heavy, but it was not oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a blank page. It was the silence of a foundation that had been swept clean, ready for a new structure to be built. I cracked the window a few inches. The cold, wet air of Seattle rushed in, stinging my face, waking me up. It tasted like rain. It tasted like freedom. It was bitter, yes, but it was the only thing I had tasted in years that felt real. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the sunrise. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below with your location, and let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button, subscribe, to the Calm Revenge Stories channel. And smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who need a reminder that the truth always comes out in the end.